the Samurai limited edition pin is available now. Hurry and order yours now before they run out, or get one for free by signing up at Patreon like all of these nice people. This episode is supported by CuriosityStream. Sign up today and get access to Nebula, a streaming platform for creators by creators. Iceland is a great example of how history and culture can be preserved. The tiny volcanic island within breathing distance of the Arctic Circle acted as an incubator for cultures that haven't been around for centuries at this point, giving a reflection into pre-Christian Scandinavia. Nation-states as we know them today are influenced by a huge variety of factors, the speed of which can be measured in proximity. Denmark was the center of the Nordic world in the early Middle Ages. Its wet, swampy and disease-ridden marshes, or mark, was what insulated the Scandinavian peninsula from the rest of Europe, which had allowed the Vikings to originate in the first place. In fact, this barrier, as well as the volatile and stormy North Sea, was so difficult to navigate that the Scandinavians were a footnote to early European cultures like the Romans. Only northern barbarian raiders were talked about at any significant length. Gotta hand it to the Romans, they didn't discriminate because everyone was a barbarian. It would take centuries of technology to bring Scandinavia into the Christian fold. Better roads, stronger horses, and ships that wouldn't capsize when you put them in the bathtub. And thus Scandinavia was Christianized. And if the Europeans had simultaneously gotten their hands on the spectacularly wealthy Viking trade routes at the same time, well, that was just an added bonus, right? Iceland, on the other hand, was incubated not by a mark, but by the gargantuan North Atlantic Ocean. The further north you go, the worse the storms get. Besides, Iceland was out of the way and didn't offer much in the way of valuable trade to even bother with. So a few more centuries in the technology oven, Iceland would have to wait its turn. But in the meantime, we got to see what these northern barbarians would do, isolated so far from the rest of the world. During the Viking Age, also called the early Middle Ages before it was cool, the Scandinavians ruled the trade on the northern part of the European continent. The trade was financed by raiding, or Viking. It wasn't long before these raids ventured outside of Scandinavia into pre-existing, yes, let me say that again, pre-existing trade routes, bringing back valuable wealth to Denmark, Norway and Sweden because nothing sells quite like stolen Christian treasure. Eventually, the Vikings themselves were forging new trade routes in faraway unknown lands, exploring beyond their icy Scandinavian fortress. And the direction of this exploration was often determined by which way the prospective nations were facing. The Swedes went north to Lapland and east to what is now Russia. The Danes went to the British Isles and mainland Western Europe. But as far as the Norwegians, heck, all they had was a whole lot of ocean near where they were. There must be at least something out there. Hey look, some islands. And there was, the Faroe Islands. Barren for most of its history, was discovered en route between Norway and Ireland. Settled by the Vikings and used as a trade post for further Viking raids, along with Orkney and Shetland, the Faroe Islands became an important link to great wealth over the sea. Just try not to get lost getting there. One fine day, a Viking got lost getting there and found himself sighting an island he was certain he'd never seen before. "There must be humans there," he exclaimed. "Look at all the smoke from the campfires." Not realizing that volcanoes are more than capable of producing smoke without human habitation. Iceland is the land of fire and ice, literally, originating as a series of volcanoes in a fault line exploding its way out of the Norwegian Sea and cleaving itself into its ragged and barren landscape. There is some evidence that the Norse were in fact not the first settlers of the island, who may have been Gaelic monks from Ireland, but they didn't stay, presumably because it's bloody freezing. But as for the Norwegians, who were all too familiar with living in a frozen wasteland, to them it was absolute paradise. "This place is beautiful, isn't it? I shall call it Snowland." Alright, let's go home, it's freezing. Not long after, another sailor, Guthr Svarvason, also accidentally landed on the island. "This place is beautiful, isn't it? I shall name it Gutharshomi, after myself." Alright, let's go home, it's freezing. Finally, a third sailor, Hrafna-Flóki Vilgetherson, sailed to the island, on purpose this time. "This place is beautiful, isn't it?" There's an awful lot of ice here. And so Iceland was born. News of this land filled with plenty of timber, ivory, and fish spread quickly in Norway. Ingolfr Arnason would set sail to the island in 874. As he neared the island, he threw 2 carved wooden pillars overboard and vowed to settle wherever they washed ashore, seeing it as a blessing from the gods. The pillars landed nearby to the settlement of what would become Reykjavik, meaning smoky cove after the geothermal steam rising from the rock. Just as a side note, remember this guy? Well, according to legend, he had a crew member that escaped when Gutha left for Scotland, and some believe that he and his slaves may have in fact become the first permanent settlers of the island. We will probably never know for sure. Ingolfr's settlement was by all evidence a very difficult life. The winters were harsh, livestock kept dying, and his Irish slaves killed his brother, for which he in turn pursued and killed in retribution. Which is, a great start. But other than that, we don't really know much, mostly hearsay and oral stories passed down through the ages. Even the historical chronicle of Iceland was written centuries after the Viking Age, so it's hard to get an accurate picture of these early settlements. What we do know is that the land became periodically settled over a few decades with outlaws, exiles, broke Vikings, and all other manner of marginalized people, mostly from Norway but also elsewhere in Scandinavia. Curiously enough, there's also a lot of genetic evidence that these settlers brought with them captured slave women and concubines, mostly from Scotland and Ireland. Ingolfr's son, Thorstein, began the tradition of meeting together for the Thing, which was a custom of chieftains meeting together and discussing matters in a sort of Viking Age-style democracy. As more and more chieftains arrived to the island, the Thing grew until a National Assembly, or Althing, was established in 930, presided over in Scandinavian customary laws by law speakers. This makes the Althing the oldest parliament in the world. From there, Iceland would be home to all sorts of interesting characters. One of these was an extremely volatile Viking named Thorvald Asfaldsson, who was expelled from Norway for murder, whereupon he and his family settled Iceland. The apple, as it seems, doesn't fall far from the tree, as was the case with his son, Eric the Red, who was then himself expelled from Iceland for murder. He used his exile to discover the island of Greenland and settled it permanently in 985. Having a pedigree for discovery at this point, his son, Leif Erikson, would go on to be one of the most famous Icelanders in history, credited for being the first European to discover America. He created a settlement in an area he called Vinland in modern-day Canada, but then abandoned the village, presumably because, who would want to live in Canada? It is around this time that Christianity started to take a hold of Iceland, mostly by pressure from Norway to improve relations for trade. Leif Erikson was even among the first converted, and is also credited with introducing the new religion to Greenland. Although slowly being Christianized, the Icelanders maintained vast amounts of their ancestral pagan customs. They still met at the Althing, they still raided as Vikings for a long time, and they still settled disputes the way Vikings would. They gave birth to a rich literary sector, writing down and preserving the oral accounts in a list of sagas, some of the oldest writings in Old Norse, detailing stories from all over the Scandinavian world, from Russia and England to Denmark and Greenland. It would not be long before Iceland became a bit of an aristocracy with power concentrated in a few prominent families, which sounds awfully familiar. Norway carried favor with one of these families, the Stirlings, who defeated all other clans on the island and brought Iceland under Norwegian suzerainty. But power still largely remained with the Althing and the increasingly prominent clergy, which wasn't an entirely bad thing because Christians love fish, and boy did Iceland have a lot of fish. This would become ever more important as crop yields were very difficult in the extreme climate. By 1380, Iceland became part of the Danish-led coalition of the Kalmar Union, which you'll remember from the episode on Denmark. But the Kalmar Union, as you'll recall, eventually ended up splitting in two, and Iceland remained in the half of Denmark-Norway, where they eventually gave up almost all of their autonomy under King Frederick III, which really sucked when Barbary pirates raided them for slaves in a weird twist of irony. I always thought that slaves came to Iceland, not from Iceland. The union with Denmark also had a couple of other little side effects. Christian III imposed Lutheranism on his subjects, which started a war with the Catholic bishops who were defeated in 1550, and from then on the Reformation would completely take hold of Iceland. You'll also recall the rivalry that Denmark had had with the Hanseatic League, which really became more of a problem as Icelandic goods increased in demand in Germany and Britain, who were all too happy to trade with another Protestant nation. This led the Danish monarchy to restrict all trade of Iceland to go through Denmark only, in a sort of early mercantilism. For most Icelanders, it was pretty hard living, earning all but meager wages, and most of the wealth generated going to the merchants of Denmark. And what little agriculture they had was almost completely destroyed in an eruption of the Flóki volcano, leading to the death of up to a quarter of the population by starvation. At almost every turn, the Icelanders were sandbagged by the Danish government, preventing any growth and prosperity for the people. This extreme famine, as well as the ideas of the European Enlightenment, started making Icelanders call for a change. Those calls got louder at the outbreak of the Napoleonic Wars. The 19th century would be Iceland's road to independence. The Danish-Norwegian Empire had allied with Napoleon during the Coalition Wars, and so found itself at the end of a cleaving tool in 1814. Iceland remained part of the Union, but had its all things suspended, which, as you can imagine, they were not happy about. It would take John Sigurdsson, a self-described history nerd and Icelandic romanticist, to really get the ball rolling on independence, and Home Rule was granted in 1874. But the story doesn't end there, because European monarchies started to get a little concerned about the rampant destruction caused by nationalism in a little event called the First World War. Fine, you're independent, but I still get to be your king. I'll be like the King of England, and you'll be like our Canada. Ugh. Another side note, but 391 Icelanders did actually fight in the war under other nations' flags. Among a few other concessions, the Danes were also in charge of Iceland's defense, which was a little hard for them to do in 1940 when Nazi Germany conquered them in a little under 6 hours. Great. Iceland was alone. Sven Björnsson set about creating an emergency government and a small coast guard. But completely the opposite of what you may expect, Iceland did end up getting invaded. By the British though, because they felt Iceland was too valuable to be captured by the Germans. Grumble, 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 grumble. British occupation was then handed over to the United States, both occupations revitalizing the Icelandic economy. By some accounts, the nation had a 100% employment rate during the war. Icelandic casualties of the war were limited to a few civilian ships sunk by the Germans. But as the war progressed, the Icelanders had started to get a taste for going it alone, and they liked it. This led the whole thing to hold a plebiscite on whether or not to secede from Denmark, which passed by 97%. And so from 1943, Iceland would become a republic, with Björnsson as its president. The Danish king did send a letter of congratulations, so I guess they're cool with it. From there, things were pretty quiet. Even when Iceland did come to the center of the world stage, it was during the Cod Wars, in which the UK and Iceland fought over an expansion of Icelandic fishing rights. The conflict began in 1958 and lasted until 1976, and resulted in an almost unheard of one single casualty, and crucially, an Icelandic victory. Icelandic people are a really hard bunch, enduring living in the very fringes of human habitation, enduring all manner of what Mother Nature has to throw at them. Freezing temperatures and storming seas, active volcanoes, and enough rain to make an Englishman jealous. They provide a glimpse into the Viking past, recording the lives and cultures of a romantic bygone era, being so insulated from the rest of their world by geography and by foreign rulers that it's not surprising how much of an isolated dynamic they developed. Icelandic is even the closest living language to what the Vikings spoke, and with some practice they can even read those old sagas without much difficulty. As an island in the relative middle of nowhere, they have thrived into the modern age, and it's all thanks to that spirit of endurance. And we can learn a thing or two from them, like this series, Life on Fire, which you can watch over at CuriosityStream and its bundle deal with Nebula. Ever since the eruption of this volcano in 2010, scientists have been striving to predict when the next eruption will take place and where. Since these Icelandic volcanoes lie right in the middle of one of the busiest shipping and air traffic corridors in the world, and as the world becomes ever more connected, so do these eruptions pose a greater risk to human life and the economy. Studying these volcanoes is absolutely fascinating, and I definitely recommend checking this series out. CuriosityStream has thousands of titles and documentaries covering history, science, nature, and a whole lot more for just $2.99 a month. But if you use my link at curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE, you'll not only get to try CuriosityStream for free, but you'll also get access to Nebula. While CuriosityStream is a great place for high-budget, well-produced documentaries, myself and other educational channels built Nebula as a place where we can try new things, create new series that wouldn't carry the risk of being demonetized by the YouTube algorithm. There's already great series up there, like this one by Real Engineering on the logistics of D-Day, as well as this amazing video by City Beautiful on the planning of ancient Rome. CuriosityStream supports this channel and others like it by making this bundle deal with Nebula, and by signing up, you'll not only be helping us out, but also getting access to some amazing new content. Try out both CuriosityStream and Nebula for free when you head to curiositystream.com/SUIBHNE. In these really difficult times, I just want to say I hope everyone is staying inside and healthy, and that this is the perfect time to keep on learning. If there's some topic you've been meaning to read up on or a series you've been meaning to check out, there's literally no better time than right now. Keeping your brain active and stimulated is key to coming out on the other side of this. Thank you to those who have supported this channel on Patreon, especially in these uncertain times. If you'd like to sign up, you'll also get this samurai pin thrown in for free. Stay safe. Until next time.